I was absolutely one of those people who was like, oh, this small business ownership thing can't be that hard. Like I can clearly do it better than everybody else. And so that is really what kind of, really led home the idea of like, oh, like business acquisition is like a thing. When I ended up buying the accounting firm that I have in April of 23, it was part of my like original business plan to become a profit first professional. Make sure you've got a really great partner. Like from real estate acquisitions to business acquisitions and all of that sort of stuff, like none of this could have happened without the support of my wife. Right now, we're going to be adding a third with another acquisition that we haven't even talked about yet.
Welcome to the Exceptional Companies Podcast, a podcast for purpose-led entrepreneurs looking to master the art of buying, selling, or optimizing small businesses. Your host, Chris Seegers, founder of Exceptional Companies and author of Selling Main Street, has over a decade of experience starting, buying, and leading successful businesses. He's here to guide you through the complex world of business transactions and growth. Each week, we dive deep with actionable insights, expert interviews, and real-world strategies to activate and equip you to live exceptionally and build exceptional businesses. Now, let's dive into today's episode. Here's your host, Chris Seegers.
Welcome to the Exceptional Companies Podcast, where we discuss how to buy, sell, and grow your business. I'm joined today by James Masotti, an acquisition entrepreneur who has bought one business, is working on buying another business, was a connection through a good friend of mine. James, welcome to the show, brother.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. Great to be here.
Yeah, man, I'm super excited because you have gotten into the bookkeeping and CPA space, which we've done a bunch of valuations on businesses. My brother's a CPA, and so we've been looking for a business that we could buy for him. And so back us up a little bit and let's talk about how you got into acquisition entrepreneurship, because most folks have no understanding of what it is that you can buy a business. They think either you start it or you stay an employee. So walk us through that story, man. How'd you get into this industry?
Yeah, sure. So I kind of first came across it. So I'm a real estate investor. So that's like the easiest way to kind of start off in terms of like how I got started, so to speak. But where that kind of connects into it is there's a pretty popular real estate podcast called Bigger Pockets. And for a while, they had the Bigger Pockets business podcast as well. And one of the guests they had, there were two very influential guests for me personally that they had on that podcast. One was Walker Deibel, the author of Buy Then Build. And so he was on the podcast, read the book. And so that is really what kind of, really led home the idea of like, oh, like business acquisition is like a thing. And like, that's within my reach. Like if I can buy real estate, then like I can buy businesses too. The second one that they had on there that was very influential was Profit First by Mike Michalowicz.
Yeah, that's a great system, man.
Yeah. And so I actually like when I ended up buying the accounting firm that I have in April of 23, it was part of my like original business plan to become a Profit First professional. And I became a member 3 days after I bought my business. So, I mean, like I knew right after. So I am a Profit First professional. That's part of what I bring in terms of like how I approach kind of like CFO and advisory work with my clients. Because the piece that we'll get into is like, I'm not an accountant, right? So having bought an accounting firm, not being a CPA, not being an accountant, a lot of people are like, why would you do that? And so, yeah, it's going back to kind of connecting the journey. So I had a bunch of, been in real estate, had been investing for years.
So what kind of real estate investments? Because I think a lot of the folks that buy businesses generally do own real estate or have bought real estate or owned it, because that's kind of similar. We started saying, hey, we've done this. Let's get a little more complex. So what were you buying? Where were you buying it? And then kind of walk us through that a bit.
Yeah. So all of my properties are pretty much single family residential properties in the Wilmington, Delaware market. Happens to be where I invest. I used to live there. Kind of became an accidental landlord at first. So bought my first house in 2008, right after the housing crash. I lived in it. My company relocated me to California. I started renting it and then had a tenant for 10 more years.
Nice. And what were you doing at that point in time as W-2?
So I started out as a software consultant, implementing ERP systems. So my degree's in international studies. I had always wanted to go work for like the CIA or NSA or something along those lines. I actually started off school in Germany and then got an appointment to the Air Force Academy, but then out processed back to civilian life, studied abroad in Japan. So I've kind of been all over the place.
So did you come through Colorado Springs?
I
through the
was
academy?
I was at the academy for a semester, yeah, before I
Okay,
applied.
cool. That's yeah, because that's where we live. And there's,
Yeah.
man, I'll tell you what, man, the folks that go through military branches, they generally are like, yeah, we can buy a business. We've done
Yeah.
some pretty
I'll
hard
tell you what,
things.
it was not for me. One of the things you'll notice is, like I talk a lot, so you're going to be fighting to cut me off and try to get airtime and stuff like that. And I'm very opinionated, and so being in the military at the academy where they tell you, be quiet, only speak when you're spoken to, like
Mhm.
it was
Didn't
just
work
not,
out.
it was not my style. Like it did not work out well for me. So ended up kind of going a different route, but I spoke German. So again, I ended up getting picked up in the beginning of my career by a German software company, and they flew me out to Germany. Like I learned how to do the stuff. I could talk to the programmers, all of that. And then when it kind of came to a fork in the road, I had a couple of options, like go back to grad school when I was looking at law school, or I could like stay the IT route, or the route I ultimately went with my career was in the supply chain, and was in the supply chain. And that's because the area that I happened to be responsible for was like procurement, inventory
Hmm.
management, production planning, stuff along those lines. And so spent 15 years in supply chain, including being a part of like the startup of Amazon Logistics. We were literally like white unmarked vans. It was originally part of Amazon Fresh. We were literally going to the Home Depot down the street and buying, 2x4s and plywood and building racks to try to fit into these vans and figure out how to route customer orders on spreadsheets with Google Maps and stuff like that. I mean, we're talking early days of Amazon Logistics, not the fancy blue vans everybody sees driving around now. So did Amazon for a couple of years, got out of that, and then ultimately ended my career at a as vice president of supply chain for a 250 $300 million private equity owned company. And so it was buying real estate all throughout that. In 2018, I think it was, me and two other business partners started a property management company just to take care of our properties. We didn't really feel like the folks that were doing it that well. A lot of real
For
estate
sure.
folks are like sales and marketing people, and property
Hmm.
management is more operations. And so,
Yep.
like, as an
100%.
operations person, I was like, you guys suck at this. Like, I can
Hmm.
do it better. So we kind of brought that in house, got some remote team members in the Philippines to help us with the day to day. Did a lot of that wrong in the first year, and it took a while to kind of build up our systems and stuff like that. But through that experience, I kind of learned that, starting from scratch was not for me. When we started that business, similar to kind of the conversation we had before hitting record, we always kind of viewed like, hey, maybe we should buy into other verticals that were real estate adjacent as a way of kind of
Yep.
like sourcing deals. So we were like, oh,
For
like,
sure.
go into like commercial cleaning, or
Hmm. Pest
other
control.
areas where we could get leads in for the property management business, which would ultimately then also be leads for future acquisitions, right? So
Hmm.
as property owners age out, they maybe want to get rid of the stuff. Hey, we've been managing the property for years, we know its maintenance history, the tenants that are there. It's a great way to try to acquire stuff. So like even back in like 2018, like again, having listened to by then, Walker Dybel, and read the book
Hmm.
like from the Bigger Pockets Business podcast, it was kind of already the seeds being planted like back that far. Fast forward to 2022, having my annual meeting with my business partner, talking about like, hey, do we want to get it back into buying real estate? Like COVID's over, real estate prices are going crazy. And at that point, I was like, hey, like the balance sheet's been pretty good with all this real estate acquisition and like appreciation there, but like it really doesn't cash flow all that well.
Yep. For sure.
Well, when all those loans are paid off and like, rents have gone up over 20 years, but like right now it doesn't. I was like,
Yep.
businesses are going to cash flow a lot better, even though they don't trade at the same equity multiples that real estate does. I was like, so
Hmm.
great way to kind of like build out the, cash flow P&L side of the equation to then funnel some of that money back into real estate acquisitions and kind of build them both up kind of simultaneously, right? And so that
It's
was when I
funny
was
how
like,
many people come to that realization because you're like, so many tax benefits with real estate,
yeah,
such few levers. I mean,
yeah,
I talked about that with another guest. I'm like, I love real estate and we own a bunch of it,
yeah,
but I just got tired of like, hey, we're kind of done. We've stabilized it and now we either sell it or grow the
yeah,
rents if we can. And that's it. Whereas with business, you have thousands of levers
yeah,
and you get all this cash flow if you run your business right. And then you can take your depreciation and all the real estate benefits, cost segs, all those things,
yeah,
and really like create a much higher net benefit for
yeah,
yourself. That's
exactly.
really
And
interesting.
yeah, and that's exactly kind of like what I kind of saw and talked through with my business partner, who's been one of my best friends since I was in elementary school. He's my daughter's godfather, so like he's kind of along for the ride and everything. So while we're active
Nice.
partners, in all those other ventures, he is a limited partner, in the accounting acquisition and stuff along those lines. as well. And we'll see how long he stays along for the ride, depending on how crazy I get with stuff. But yeah, but that's kind of where it all got started. And then so in 2022, it was like, all right, do we want to buy more real estate? And that was when I was like, no, I think it's time to go buy a company. And so we brainstormed like, okay, what kind of things do we want to do? At the time, he has his MBA, he's an economist. And so like he kind of always did like the finance side of things, because that would he lived in spreadsheets. And not that I didn't know numbers, I lived in spreadsheets from like a supply chain analytical perspective, not in terms of like running models and doing, finances. So he kind of always did that. And it was one of those like, it was really annoying and tedious. And so it was like, he was like, it would be really nice to get that off my plate. And I was like, great, sounds like we're gonna go buy a bookkeeping company. And the more I dug into it, I realized it really fed into like my passion for coaching folks as well, because like there's, no matter how unsophisticated your business is, like at the end of the day, like you still have business financials. Like even if you do it on a piece of paper, you still have something you have to turn into whoever's doing your taxes for the IRS, right? So it's like, even if you don't have, CRMs and ERP systems and like all these other fancy technology and whatever, like you always have numbers. And with those, you can find ways to optimize your business. And so from my supply chain world, I always work very closely with our controllers and CFOs and all of that sort of stuff. So while I'm not technical in the sense of like getting in the weeds of doing the double entry bookkeeping and all of that sort of stuff, like give me some financial statements and I'll tell you like where we need to go from a business perspective to be like, oh, here's the levers we need to pull. Here's where we're heavy. Here's where we're low. Here's what our ratios are. Like I understand how to do kind of more that side of it. And that's
so did you learn that previously? Did you learn that through the acquisition due diligence process? Because that's a super useful skill, even when you're looking at diligencing businesses to buy.
Yeah, so that I want to call largely self-taught. So like back in, so again, I also started out, I previously worked for like a Campbell Soup company. I live in Southern New Jersey. So Campbell Soup's based here in Camden, New Jersey. So when I was working there, I got on the board of directors for like a professional nonprofit, not a nonprofit, but like a professional organization basically. Right. And so like as a board member, like we had to look at financials and the P&Ls, and I was working with, directors and VPs at other companies. I was the young professional member on the board. And so just having some of those folks kind of like take me under their wing and start teaching me how to look at financial statements. And then
for sure,
as I got into like management level positions where I started having budgets and P&Ls and just, again, working very closely with my controllers and asking questions about like, hey, why, like, what's this, inventory reserve that we're talking about? And it's like, oh, that hits the balance sheet. And it's like, understanding what I always kind of called funny money, which to me is accrual accounting. It's like, I care what the cash is. Like accrual accounting is a joke. Like the money hasn't left my bank account yet. It doesn't matter, or like, so
for our listeners, like if somebody's coming into this looking to buy a business or just looking to run their business more efficiently, how would you recommend them get more reps at the financial statements? Because that's like a really good skill for sure.
The short answer to that is I'm launching my YouTube channel next week, and I already have videos recorded that specifically like walk people through how to look at and read their financial statements. So first and foremost, by the time
hold on, where's that YouTube channel? What's it going to be called?
So James Masotti. So just go for James Masotti and you'll find it. Well, whether the videos are fully launched yet, but they're recorded, so they will be coming. How to go through that. But in terms of getting the reps, right? One, if you're interested in ETA, the short answer is like there's a lot of just really good resources in the sense of like request SIMs, like get them to send you financials and you'll have financials to look at, right? From there, again, not to like plug more stuff, but I also have a school community where for $89 a month, like you can join in and we have open office hours every week. So it's like whether you're meeting with me or one of my team leads, we do 2 calls a week right now. We're going to be adding a third with another acquisition that we haven't even talked about yet. That's like more marketing related. And so like when we get that all queued up, it's kind of one of those like, hey, go watch the YouTube stuff, go request a bunch of SIMs, spend $89 a month, come jump on with me and I'll sit there and go through, financial statements and talk with you and ask questions and and whether if it's me or somebody else, like you can find somebody who has the chops to kind of be like bounce ideas off of and say like, hey, what do you see here? Here's what I see. Right. And,
I love it, man. And that's what I always tell folks. I'm like, just take a bunch of SIMs. I wrote a book on how to sell a business. I'm working on one, just a very simple primer on how to buy a business. But really, I'm like, don't even think about the industry. Go pull every online listing, ask for the SIMs, and just look at them. And after you've seen 30 or 40, you start seeing patterns and you start seeing where people lie on their P&Ls and their financials. And so if you can get the financials and the tax returns, you're going to pretty quickly see like, okay, yeah, seems to be a solid business, or man, there's some weird stuff. And usually when there's some weird stuff, it's
Yeah.
weird stuff,
Yeah.
like
And
legitimately.
like, and that maybe was like really natural for me too. Cause again, like I did the exact same thing for real estate investing. So like when people are
Mm-hmm.
getting started in real estate investing, it's the exact same thing. It's like
Yeah,
most good deals don't get bought on the MLS, but I did
for
buy
sure.
like my second and third, like I have bought deals off of the MLS before. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but it's one of those, like, even if you go on the MLS, like you can still go try to underwrite the deal, right? Like go, hey, I got to buy it for this. Like here's what, blah, 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 whatever it's going to be. And then you come out and you go like, oh, this doesn't cash flow at all, right? I can't pay that much. Great. Well, now you back into
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, well, what could I pay or what are rents? And you
Yeah,
start just learning. And then, so as soon as you see that one where it's like, oh, wait, these numbers actually might work. Like,
yeah, for
that's how you
sure.
go. So again, doing the reps is definitely about like, you'll just start to learn like, okay, like, how would you value this? Or like, all right, what, okay, I don't like this aspect, or I don't like that aspect. And I got really lucky ultimately when we bought my business, because one of the things I did know, again, I was planning to stay in my corporate job. So one of the things that was clear to me was, even though I was looking to acquire, and at the time we were looking to basically only acquire up something that was like up to 750,000 of purchase price. So not SDE,
Mm-hmm.
750,000 purchase price. And with that was when we started pulling
And
SIN.
so walk our listeners through that. Was that, hey, this is kind of the cash I have plus the amount of debt that I'm comfortable with? Like, because I think a lot of folks are like, I can't buy, or I need to go too big or need to go too small. Like walk them through that process, because I think that's important how you got there.
Yeah. So the thought process there was basically like, from a real estate perspective, we had used private investors. Now, we never
Mm-hmm.
like syndicated or raised a fund or did any of that kind of stuff. We would basically, get one investor to hold a mortgage on one property. So we were accustomed to kind of retaining 100% equity between my partner and I. Right. And so when it came time to like going to look to buy a business, like we were familiar with the 7A product. And so it was like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
we can go do 10% down. We never really had this thought in our mind of like going to raise that 10%, from equity, folks to bring in and then therefore buy larger. So it was kind of like, hey, with the like extra money we had lying around, like how much were we willing
Mm-hmm.
to kind of throw into this? And we were basically
Yep.
looking at it from the perspective of like, hey, if I can basically get all of my cash back out of the business in the first year, then that's a really good deal. Right. And
For
so
sure.
that's kind of how we were looking at it, because he has a full-time job. I had a full-time job. And so as we started, our thought was kind of always, we were not going to be day-to-day operators. It was more like we were looking for a business that was going to have somebody in place that was doing the day-to-day interactions, where we didn't need to take big salaries because we had salaries already, but we were just
Mm-hmm.
looking at it from hey, if this has a 25% return on our capital, that's a
Yep.
pretty good cash on cash return compared to, the 10% we're seeing in real estate. Right. So like for us, it was I get 10% parking my money in real estate, or I can get 20 to 25+% in, buying a small business. So it was, okay, like we're going to get faster returns on our money doing it that way.
And
Now
even
when we look
backing up to the comment when we were chatting about like MLS or publicly listed like businesses or real estate,
yeah,
what I also tell people is like, you know what, like if they want, let's say they want $1 million. Hey, I want to sell my business for $1 million, and you're like, it's worth 300. I'm like,
mm-hmm.
send that offer.
Yeah.
If you're like, this business actually is decent, like it's a business we could grow or whatever, but it's
Yeah.
just way overvalued, I'm like, send the offer, because most likely if it's still listed, they've got a terrible broker, which is most of them. It's way overvalued. They didn't value it correctly. And they may just say, you know what, I won't take 300, but I'll take 450. And, and so you get the ability to start negotiating things with really no downside risk, like non-binding LOI. Here's what the economics says. And we've done, I mean, dozens and dozens and dozens of those. And most of them, they either get pissed at you or they say no. But we've got a couple that they're like, you know what? You're the only offer we've gotten in 6 months. This offer is not exactly what we want, but we're kind of not that far apart. How could we get there?
Yeah.
So I love that. And then, so let's talk a little bit about, because you did, so in social media, there's kind of two theses, which I think both of them could be right. One is like, go as big as you can, right? Buy as big a business as you can, raise equity, do whatever. I love that. The other thesis, which is what we've done, is brick by brick.
Mm-hmm.
So we own 9 different businesses, and some of them are small, and we just kept going bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And so talk us through that a little bit, because you've bought one, you've got another one coming, maybe a third coming, and we're in the same position where now we've built out our systems. And so every time we're going bigger, right? But we also protected our downside risks. It's that whole asymmetric risk, like, hey, minimal downside, a lot of upside. But walk us through that thought process and where you're going next.
Yeah. So I would say, like, again, like early on, there wasn't like a ton of thought again around, like, we had always had in this mind, like you said, like we didn't want to have to, do a syndication or like raise, massive amounts of capital. We've kicked the idea around.
Why is that? Let's dig into that, because I think that is like most people don't. And we've done some bigger funds, but not anything smaller for buying businesses.
Yeah, so it's honestly, it's a psychological thing, and I've struggled a lot with imposter syndrome and anxiety and a lot of self-doubt and limiting beliefs. And I got connected with some really great folks this past year that have really helped me work on my mental fitness and my mental health and really get past a lot of that. So, like,
was that mindset coaching, or like, tell us a little bit about that? Because I would guess most listeners struggle with that. I do, I know.
A little bit. So, I mean, I got to it a little bit by accident. So, like, again, what we could, we go into this, we're going to get way longer than 30 minutes, but we'll fast forward. We'll get to the point where, okay, so I bought my business 9 months into owning the business, I lost about 30% of my revenue. Right. So it put me into a spot where, again, I have an operations background, so I don't know sales and marketing. So in my head, like, this has been a great referral business. The previous owner used BNI. I live in Southern New Jersey. She was in a BNI chapter in Portland, Oregon. So the business was mostly remote, but a lot of the clients were based in that area. So I was like, okay, no big deal. I didn't realize BNI was a pay to play. So like, as soon as we got out of BNI, like, all the referrals that came from those people like dried up and went away. I then tried to join a local BNI chapter, but it was too far away. And I hadn't really, because I was never part of the small business community, like, I didn't have a ton of people that I could refer to those people. And if you don't refer people, you don't get referrals. And I don't know if it just wasn't a good fit or good jive, but after like 9-10 months of being in BNI and like never getting any referrals, it was just one of those, like, all right, this isn't going to be a good fit. And so it was like, all right, now I had to completely rethink sales and marketing. So I joined a personal branding mastermind group. So that is, led me down kind of like organic social media and like really building out my presence, trying to figure out getting onto more podcasts and doing webinars and things along those lines, and just, utilizing that as a mechanism for trying to, generate growth. Well, one of the folks in that group has his own business coaching mastermind, and he focuses a lot on mindset for business owners in particular. And so it was through the relationship I built with that individual. His name's Mike Kitko. Go check him out on social media. He's amazing. Again, great friend.
Should we have him on? What do you think?
What's that?
Would he be a good person to have on?
I mean, he doesn't do acquisition stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like, he organically has grown his business. But like, if you wanted somebody to, he has his own podcast, but like, if you wanted somebody to go deep on the like toxic mindset stuff that a lot of people have that hold them back from like achieving what they want to be able to achieve, like, he absolutely is somebody that I would wholeheartedly recommend bringing on to talk about that stuff.
I love that, because I think like, whether you're pre-acquisition, acquisition, post-acquisition, I just met with one of my best friends, and he bought a huge company, and he is in the thick of it. Just like you, like, every business you buy, first 18 months, everything breaks, right? Yeah. People sue you, they leave, like, everything breaks. He's in the thick of it. Yeah. And so I just spent a lot of time just working through like some mindset stuff, encouraging them, praying over them, providing some ideas. But yeah, I think most entrepreneurs I can't remember who said it, but they basically said, hey, if you're an entrepreneur, you're only going to have like one good day in succession. Yeah. And I think that's right. It's like you get into a groove where you're like, and this week we're kicking butt, and then boom, the fifth day something bad happens, and you're like, seriously?
It's literally. So like, we just sent out on Tuesday, I just sent out price increase letters to a lot of my clients, but there was a couple of clients that we didn't send them to. One of those is my largest client. They sent us an email today letting us know that they're terminating their services. And it was just one of those like gut punches of like, you've got to be kidding. Come on. Like, the one of the few clients I didn't send an increase to is like the one that's dropping us. It's just like, and we've got a few things in the pipeline, so we're going to quickly replace that revenue. But the hope was just like, after all the kicks that we took last year with the revenue drops, I finally felt like we're building some momentum. And then to like take a hit, like I said, so it happens.
100%. So what are some of the what are some things that really surprised you about either the onboarding process or just owning a business?
Yeah.
Talk through that a little bit, because the first 12 months, man, that's a piece that we do a lot of mentoring on, just to really tell people, hey guys, you're not crazy. This is normal. Like all this stuff happens.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the, like, I am in most rooms I walk into, I am smarter than most of the people in the room. And I spent my entire corporate career knowing that I was smarter than most of my coworkers, most of my bosses, and all of that sort of stuff. And so I was absolutely one of those people who was like, oh, this small business ownership thing can't be that hard. Like I can clearly do it better than everybody else, right? Absolutely had that perspective walking into this, right? And then I get in there and I'm like, well, wait a minute, like we're all like, why isn't anybody, like, we have really good services. Why are people not like, why don't people realize that? Like, why aren't we getting more referrals? Like, why is sales and marketing like so hard? Like all of a sudden, like things that I thought were going to be like, oh yeah, I'm going to be able to do this stuff easy. And it wasn't, and like the simple thing that I would say like is it's going to be harder than whatever you think it is going to be. Right. Like that's I have no other way of summing it up of like, you can hear it from people as much as you want. I mean, I don't know if, if you've got kids or whatever, but it's like, it's one of those, like, until you go through having kids, like
for sure,
until people can tell you what it's like to have kids, but until you do it, like you don't actually know what it's like. You can never explain it in a way that it actually sinks in until you do it. Business ownership to me has been that exact same thing. No matter how many podcasts you listen to where, again, like I listen to Acquiring Minds and they always talk about like the fetal position moment and stuff like that too. And it's like, you can hear that all you want, but until you experience it, you just don't know. And I think that's like to sum it up is like, if that sounds like it scares you, absolutely do not do this. Like it is not for everybody and it's important.
So let's talk about that. Like, do you think there are genetic entrepreneurs, James, or not? Like who would you recommend get into this? Because I don't think there's genetics. I think it's, man, honestly, I just think it's like disciplines and habits. Like, I think anybody can do it. I think there's certain people that might be a little bit better predisposed to it. But what do you think on that?
I mean, I think the interesting thing with like nature nurture is like, I have a brother who's 8 years younger than I am. And like, there's some ways we're very similar in ways that we're like completely polar opposite. Right. And so it's like, we've clearly got the same genetics, but also like there was something else that happened that like we kind of ended up so different. Right. So like, there's definitely some argument for like, you have some genetics. It's like what you're predisposed to. It's like if your parents, were entrepreneurs and things like that. One of the big things that like in some of the mindset stuff that we've talked about is like everybody kind of has like, we're specifically looking at it from a money blueprint perspective, right? So like some people might come from a family or a history of like, like money's a scarcity thing. And so some people either take that and they inherit that trait, but then other people will like repel that trait having gone through the exact same experience. So it's not like you can with 100% certainty say like, oh, just because you were exposed to entrepreneurship, if your exposure to entrepreneurship was like, oh, it's a freaking roller coaster, well, you might go cling to a W-2 job and be like, I'm never doing that. I saw what it did to my mom or my dad or my family and whatever. On the flip side, like you could go through that exact same experience and be like, man, I saw the roller coaster they went through, but I also like saw like they never had somebody they had to answer to. Like they were the master of their own destiny. They worked because they wanted to. They were able to be there for, us and the important things that were. So like exact same experience, two different people could react to the exact same way. So like, it's hard. What I would definitely say is like, there's people I know who are like, oh, real estate investing is risky. And I'm almost like, well, actually, like owning only one property is risky because when it goes vacant, you have 100% vacancy versus owning 10 properties. Like one goes vacant, I'm only at a 10% vacancy now. So like I understand like the law of magnification from that perspective, right? But also like people who invest in the stock market, I'm like, I don't want to be at the whims of like, meme investors and like hedge funds and all these other crazy people who are manipulating the market because I have no control over that. Or some investor, CEO goes and embezzles money or does a crime and like now their stock tanks. Like I have no control over that. I have control over how I underwrite a deal or who I hire. Like, so for me, like my desire to want to control things is what kind of led me down a path of like, hey, like at least if I screw it up, it was on me. And I already talked about like, I have as much as I talked about not having self-confidence, I also have enough confidence to be like, I'm smart and I'm going to bet on myself more than I want to bet on a whole lot of other people.
Do you like what you hear so far? Make sure you never miss an episode by clicking the subscribe button now and check out our website, www.excoadvisors.com. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Thank you for your support. Now, back to the show.
So let's talk, James. Okay, because you mentioned earlier in our talk how you bought the business and you were going to keep your W-2 and then you got fired. Okay, so we're talking about risk assessment. And there's so many folks that are like, Chris, why do you tell everybody that owning a business, there's risk in everything, right? W-2 has risk, owning a business has risk, but I don't think having a W-2 is safer for that exact reason. I appreciate you bringing that up because you have zero control as an employee, zero. I mean, you could be the best employee and the company goes belly up. You could be the best employee and you get sued. You could be the best employee and your boss doesn't like you. I mean, so let's talk a little bit about that process. So did you have the business purchased or you were acquiring it, or like where were you at in the process?
It was my last day was the Friday. I left on Sunday to go buy the company and my last day was that Friday. So like literally, 3 days difference between, when my last day was and when I went, and bought the business.
And you were thinking, hey, I'm going to have a job and work the business part-time because it's got a team. And all of a sudden you came into this headspace of like, this is it. So walk us through that a bit.
Yeah. So, I mean, there was, taking time to kind of try to figure out, okay, what does this mean? What am I going to do? And I'm like, all right, hey, I'm going to be able to grow this a lot faster and, make a bigger impact and all of that sort of stuff, right? Was kind of just the thought process of, and I had ideas of like, okay, I'm going to grow it to this and be able to start paying myself. Cause like, again, there wasn't enough cash flow to actually take a salary. Like, again, I ended up buying a much smaller business, it was only doing about 115,000 in SDE. Right. So again, like the idea was, hey, that's going to debt service. Plus, again, I mentioned like being a profit first professional where there's a membership fee I have to pay for that every month and some other things, and again, that quickly went down to, not nothing, but like not enough to actually pay myself off of. Right. Luckily, we live very frugally. My wife's a teacher. So again, great benefits and all of that sort of stuff. And, so like I didn't need a very large salary or our lifestyle could take that hit. And we had money in savings. So again, I had been a high income earner for a long time and we, had money saved up. So in my head, I was like, hey, whatever, I'm going to take 6 months a year, we'll build it up and then I'll start paying myself. And yeah, like I said, then we took a 30% hit in revenue. And then that set me back that much further to kind of that journey, and yeah, so like I said, got into the personal branding group at the beginning of this year. And there's been a lot of kind of setting stuff up along the way, to try to work that journey. So
yeah. Young people really think, and I think I thought this when I was younger too, that life is just kind of slowly going up, right? Yeah. So, hey, every year I make a little more money. My net worth goes up. I do a little better, but it's a whipsaw, man. Yeah. Like some years you're like, I didn't make any money that year. And then the next year you made 3X and some years are break even years. Yeah. And I think just staying in the game and learning and growing and evolving is what we've done. Cause this was 2024 was a super tough year for, I think, probably any small business owner. Yeah. In 2025, I'm optimistic, but you never know. But what I do know is instead of thinking in like a 2-year horizon, now I'm just thinking 10 years. I'm always like, hey, do we want to own this 10 years? Because we can make it work over a 10-year period.
Exactly. And that's, like I said, it took me some time to kind of get to that same kind of mindset and things along those lines. And I forget where I've heard it. And it's probably been a couple of different places, but it's kind of the idea of like, you're willing to work, 5 years or 10 years in corporate, getting your 5%, if you're lucky, annual raise, and then you get your promotion every couple, 3 years, that gets you an extra $10,000 or $20,000 kind of a thing. Right. And it's like, or you could just grind in small business land for 5 years. And it's not uncommon to see like your income grow $100,000 or $200,000 or more in a single year.
For sure.
Versus, having to spend 5 or 10 years to get to a 6-figure salary in corporate land, right? Like depending on where you are, if you come from an IB or PE or other consulting, higher income earning backgrounds. But if you're talking like, your average, base hit person coming out of school, going to work for a Fortune 500 company or middle market company, like you're coming out making 60 grand a year and it's going to take you a couple of years to get to 100 grand, right? Like,
yeah.
So,
yeah. And I've also told folks like the highest value I believe in owning a business is not the cash flow. It's the learning, man. like, oh my gosh, you become a master at marketing and sales. You become a master at ops. You understand what profit is and how cash flows.
Yeah.
You get great at hiring and firing people and coaching people.
Yeah.
Those are skills that even if in 5 years you're like, I don't want to do this, you will be the greatest manager in any business you ever go into.
The challenge is, and like, it's really interesting. So like, unless you're somebody who has the ability to make that kind of bet. And I remember back to, again, like Tim Ferriss, and I can't remember if it was on his podcast or he said it in like 4 Hour Work Week or whatever, but it was like the idea of like, he had $100,000 saved up and he was like, okay, I can go spend this at business school and get an MBA for 2 years, or I can like go start a business with it. And if worst case scenario is like, I lose this money, like I'll still probably have learned just as much, if not more, by actually doing it than I would by getting the MBA. The difference is, okay, yeah, he had the cash saved up for whatever reason, right? Most people don't have $100,000 sitting around that they can pay cash for their MBA. They take loans out for that, right?
Yep.
Well, it's really hard to go take out a loan and be like, oh yeah, I'm just going to buy a business, and if it goes broke, then like that's okay, right? Like most businesses, like that's not how banks underwrite, business loans when they give
You
them,
or the
like,
business.
yeah, like, but that is kind of how we underwrite, student loans, right? It's like, oh, just because you're going to school, like we'll give you a student loan, but we have no idea if you're going to, be a waiter making minimum wage, or if you're going to go on to be some crazy successful person. We're just going to get our student loan interest rate payment. If there was a loan product where you could pay people to go be business owners and just not care if they failed or not, I agree with you 100%. Like you're going to learn so much more by doing it than what you're going to learn in the classroom. It's just, again, most people, like, they don't have that backstop, that they feel comfortable with. And so that's where it's like, I think that's why you either see, like, when you talk about like people who are risk adverse, you'll have some people in like their early 20s be like, I got nothing to lose. So like, that's when they're jumping in, and then you have the people on the other side who are like, me in their mid 30s. That's like, okay, like I've got some stability in my life. I've got some equity. I've got whatever. Like now's the time I can feel like I can go take that risk because I have enough stability behind me. Right. And it's like, so I think you see a couple different, obviously, like archetypes, and obviously there's, wild cards in all of that. But I think that's part of why you kind of like see some of those, stereotypes. So back to the, like, is it nature versus nurture? I think like there's a certain amount of, kind of all of it mixed in, but.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. So let's talk. All right. You buy this company, you lose some clients, it drops by, 30%, which is normal. Once again, like this stuff breaks. Like as soon as you buy a business, it breaks. Yeah. That's how, man, like we bought an insurance company and like two of our best performing salespeople quit the first 2 weeks. Yeah. Now they were terrible, toxic. So it ended up being a great thing culturally. But in the first 3 months, I was like, all right, how do we replace this? Right. So let's talk a little bit about that transition and then going into the next business. So you're thinking about buying another one. Walk us through how you got from stabilizing your first business into, hey, actually, let's go start expanding.
Yeah. So stabilizing the first business was, again, from day one walking in, I implemented EOS. I say day one. So again, I bought the business in April. We had our like sit down. I had the whole team read, not Traction. I prefer the book Get a Grip, which is like tells the parable story of how to implement it. So I had my team read that over like 2.5, 3 months. We had our kickoff meeting in August. And that was kind of the start of like really getting solid on our core values, our mission, like what a kind of target clients we wanted to go after, like what did we want the business to really look like. So that was a big part of it. The other piece then, like, all right, now that I got into this and it was gonna become a full-time thing, I knew I had bought too small at that point. So very quickly, I also started focusing on like, all right, I got to start the acquisition process back up again. So I was actually under contract to buy another firm as of December of 23. So again, about 8-9 months after, I was another smaller firm, but enough that like, again, the synergies, basically I was absorbing a lot of revenue without a lot of costs. So I'd be able to drop more to the bottom line. And that deal, the seller backed away 3 days before closing. So like,
why, if you can share, because that's always interesting to me, because we've had
my theory basically is that there was a couple of points we had been negotiating on. I thought we had got to reconciliation, but it revolved around some of the data intellectual property elements of the business. And I think maybe there was some stuff there that they didn't want me to find out about, or were concerned that maybe something wasn't 100% legit. This is me reading into it. They never gave me an official answer. I just know they tried to retrade the purchase agreement on things that I wasn't willing to negotiate on, like at the 11th hour. So, so that one fell through. So that kind of sucked because again, I was already kind of, bleeding clients. Now I had broken deal costs that I added on top of that. Right.
Yeah.
So then fast forward, I was under contract, under LOI on another business in July of this year. That one, we ended up not having as much cultural alignment as I originally thought. So the seller and I kind of separately both kind of came pretty early in the due diligence process, like to the realization that it wasn't going to be a good fit, and we called it off.
Mhm.
So there wasn't any like lost money there. And then this deal, I wrote my LOI on back in October. They ended up selecting another person and their financing fell through, and they came back to me and said, do you want to do a deal? And so it's like, again, I've been looking to acquire, actively connecting with brokers that are specifically in the accounting space, literally, daily alerts on BizBuySell and BizQuest, and reaching out to my network of people in the accounting industry, saying, hey, I'm
Mhm.
buying if you know anybody who's looking to get out, and all that kind of stuff. And I've had a couple of off-market, opportunities kind of come up that, we may take a look at here this coming year.
I love it.
So again, we'll see how it all plays out. But yeah, I mean, like the acquisitions very quickly became a staple, needing to know I needed to get to more scale from where I was. But again, like having already done a deal, like having talked with other brokers, like they felt, even though like the business that I'm buying right now is from a revenue perspective 10 times larger, not quite 10 times, maybe 8 times larger than what I'm doing right now in my current business. The fact that I've already closed a transaction, right? Like made it so, and this is not the first broker that I've gone to that they're like, one, you're not just an accountant who's coming out of a practice trying to buy their first one. Like
Yep.
you are a
You're
business owner,
legitimate.
you know how to run a
Mhm.
business, you know how to take care of people. Like you've gone through the acquisition process, like you've dealt with all of that. And so the brokers, knowing what that can and can't look like, on the back end of things, and actually having deals get to the finish line, I think has helped me, have a swing at some bigger deals, throughout the year as well. So
I love it, man. Well, we're getting kind of towards the end of the podcast. So I want to close with a couple things. One, first question is just parting wisdom for younger folks that are struggling, looking to get in the space, looking to buy a business or have a business that's struggling. And the second question would be just resources, like the things you mentioned, EOS, which we utilize, Profit First. Those are two books,
mhm.
no matter what you do in business, that will help you dramatically. But let's start with wisdom and then resources, and
Yeah.
then we'll just kind of close.
Yeah, I think wisdom, I will say like the number one piece of wisdom I would say is make sure you've got a really great partner. Like
Mm,
from real estate acquisitions to business acquisitions and all of that sort of stuff, like none of this could have happened without the support of my wife. And she's a
100%.
teacher, so it's not like she like understands all the things that I'm doing, but like, she's a
When
lot
you're
more
in the fetal
comfortable
position,
with.
she's rubbing your back and saying, "You'll be all right,
Yeah,
James."
exactly. Exactly. Like she knows, she's like, you're crazy, but I love that about you, And so
Yeah,
like if you're going to go down this path, I think it's very important that like you understand if you've got the right people in your corner. Because
100%.
you want to figure that out up front, not when you're going down the path, right? Because you're already gonna have enough stress to deal with. Like if your relationships are falling apart while you're dealing with all that stuff, like that's definitely not going to help you be successful in your business. So I think like that's probably like, if it's something we didn't touch on, but I think that's like super, super critical. And then beyond that is like just like understanding your own personal risk tolerance where you are. Like it's real easy like to, one, you listen to all the podcasts and you hear all the success stories, like those all sound awesome and great, but like there are, there's ups and downs, and people don't talk about the downs nearly as much as they
Yeah,
talk about the ups, right? And
for
so
sure.
realizing like social media is a highlight reel, it's not all Alex Hormozy and Cody Sanchez, success stories kind of a thing, right? And if you're not ready to go through that roller coaster yet, like then that's okay. Because again, like it can sound cool, your friends can be doing it, whatever. It doesn't
Hmm.
mean you have to. Like it is, I think there is a self-reflection of like, there's a difference between being scared and knowing yourself. And
Hmm.
also like, I'm scared right now, but I want to do that. And so again, what work on my inner self do I need to do to get myself ready to take this risk and take this challenge, right? So I think that's
100%.
like the wisdom side of it. The resources, like you've like I said, we really did touch on a lot of them. I think like the biggest thing, like consume great podcasts. I mean, there's lots of people out there. I mean, this space nowadays,
Hmm.
like just there's so many resources. Like gobble it up, right? And learn as much as you can through osmosis from what other people are going on. This ETA space is amazing for how like supportive and willing to share people are. So like when you hear somebody
Hmm.
who's got a story that sounds similar or resonates with yours, like reach out to them, and like, they're probably going to be willing to talk to you. So like do your homework, like read the books, like come somewhat prepared. There's a lot of
Hmm.
great recorded podcasts and all that. So it's like, if you haven't done at least a little bit of research to figure some of that stuff out, do that stuff. There's lots of resources. You can find them.
I think
So-
that's a great point, though, that you made, which is most folks in this space will take your phone call and help you. I mean, like no cost and aren't going to charge you. Hey, yeah. And honestly, if you're a young person and you say, I'm not sure if this is for me, you might be able to negotiate a deal where it's like, hey, can I come in, for a day a week unpaid and learn how to be an operator? And learn if it is for me. Or, hey, can I learn EOS? Can I come in and learn EOS? EOS, we've got our own system that we've added onto through EOS, but like that's a very simple operating system for a business. Profit first is a great way to like come into it thinking, I'm going to pay myself. I'm not running this to not make cash. And the Buy Then Build, that's a great book. But yeah, I think just like reach out to somebody who's done this. Or that owns a business. And most of them are going to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to buy another business. You want to be an operator? And you come in and you have some phantom equity or some upside. Like we're trying to buy a business a year. And any time that I see somebody who's interested, I'm like, I put them on my who list, that book, Who Not How. That's another resource.
Absolutely.
It's like, who are the people in 5 years I'm going to need for the expansion we're having? And even if they're like, you know what? I don't want to be part of the equity stack. I don't want the risk. Sweet, you might be an awesome manager or leader or that sort of thing. So that's awesome, man. Well, any other parting words of wisdom?
So that's any of Ben Hardy's books are great. So he wrote Who Not How, but again, he's got a bunch of great books that are great for just mindset. I recently finished 10X is easier than 2X. Now it's a big part of like, again,
that's a great one.
My thinking now was magnitudes larger to my wife's chagrin. My goals have gotten magnified significantly, but no, parting was, like I said, if this at all sounds, like all these ups and downs and crazy stories, like you've been here, I got a smile on my face talking about it like this entire time, like, because for all the downs and things that have sucked, like there's been, it's one of those. So I'm also a trail ultra marathon runner. Right. And so when you do those kind of things, like people talk about like, you go try and run for, 5, 6, 8, 10, 24 hours at a time. Like it sucks. Like there are a lot of parts that sucks, but like most people after that, even if you just go run a normal marathon, people will be like, oh, that was terrible. I'm never going again. There are so many people who do that. And then they go sign up for another one. Right. Or an Ironman.
For sure.
Like, so if you're the kind of person who enjoys type 2 fun, you enjoy the suffering because it makes you better. If that at its core sounds like you, then this is absolutely something that you should think of. If type 2 fun is not the type of fun that you like to have, then read the books because they're fun and interesting and just listen to other people's stories for entertainment. But you should probably, maybe go the operator route rather than
be an LP in somebody else's business buying fund. Like
be along for the ride and give them
get the jollies
support and be happy you don't have to deal with it as much. Right.
Yeah, I love it. And with the SBA loans, you can be under 20% owner without having any personal guarantees. So you could just say, hey, I'm going to bring the cash, you get the loan. I'm not on the hook for it. I mean, there's a lot of cool ways to structure it. James, thank you so much for coming on the show, man. Where can people find you? You mentioned the YouTube channel, but where else? If someone wants to contact you, where should they contact you?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn's probably the best bet. So just James Masotti on LinkedIn, you'll see this handsome, slightly balding mug. And, from there, send me a DM and, we'll figure out getting connected.
I love it, man. I appreciate it. Thanks for coming on the show.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Exceptional Companies Podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or via RSS so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too. If you liked this show, please reach out through our website, www.excoadvisors.com for free tools to order a copy of Selling Main Street or to sign up for our free webinar on how to sell your Main Street business.